Okay, streaming. Here we go. Welcome, friends, to another but also a special issue of Wolff Responds. Normally, I do this, as you know, if you've been watching, on my own. But today, as part of the special quality of our broadcast, I'm accompanied by two contributors to Democracy at Work. One is Harriet Fraud. She is a psychotherapist. She is in private practice in New York City. She's a hypnotherapist and is also the author of articles and books, really on the connection between the broader society and capitalism on the one hand and intimate life on the other. And she's going to talk a little bit about the connection with all of that and the results of yesterday's election, the election on November 5th with Mr. Trump as the new president. My second guest is Shahram Azar, who is a professor of economics at Bucknell University in Pennsylvania, also a contributor to Democracy at Work, and an active author, among many other achievements, beside being a professor at Bucknell University. And I won't introduce me because you already know who I am. So I'm going to start by making some comments, as I've asked Harriet and Shahram also to make, about what they see as the significance, the meaning that we are to take away from the results of the election for president in the United States just completed. Here is my reaction as I think about this in the literally now hours since the results became known. And because I'm an economist, I'm going to focus on that. What I saw was a race between fake economics. I'm borrowing from Mr. Trump's fake news. And on the other hand, for Ms. Harris, nothing, next to nothing. Here's what I mean. Mr. Trump reacted to, as Kamala Harris also did, to the fact that masses of Americans feel that their economic situation is awful. I believe that they feel what is in fact the case, although many commentators, particularly on the Kamala Harris side, felt the need to challenge, to question, even to mock the feelings people have as if they were all somehow mistaken. They must have felt that to admit that the United States has terrible problems would be to give Mr. Trump an advantage because he would blame them for it. Of course, the answer could have been that this situation has been building for decades and is neither the responsibility of Republicans nor Democrats. It is an outcome of much deeper phenomena. I'll get back to that in a couple of minutes. So what did Mr. Trump do? He said, I'm going to protect you from this awful economic crisis that you have been plunged in and that you are suffering through. And I'm going to help you by holding back the horrible invasion of immigrants. That was one of his big pictures, his advertiser's dream, an idea that will capture people's attention. That's how you advertise a movie. This is a movie about holding back the hordes of invading Martians. And his second big idea was, I am going to smite the Chinese because they are threatening our jobs. And another wonderful story, smite the foreigner, smite the Chinese. Immigrants are foreigners, Chinese are foreigners. That's very old in America, to condemn the foreigner. Now, these ideas, if you think about them in economic terms, which is what I do, are silly. They are senseless. They are nonsense, literally. We are a country of 330 million people, one of the biggest and richest in the world. 10 to 12, and that's the number of the Homeland Security Department, 10 to 12 undocumented immigrants, themselves among the poorest people on earth, are not in a position to cause the problems of a rich 330 million population. That's ridiculous. That's not something that you argue against any more than you would argue against somebody who explains to you that their religious beliefs were shaped in them by a conversation they had with a large tree over there. You back away from such a person because you know that this is nonsense. This is nonsense. You're not going to deal with the argument. Now with the Chinese, it's the same nonsense. Mr. Trump kept saying, I'm going to hit the Chinese with a tariff. That's not what a tariff is. First of all, a tariff is a very interesting thing for a Republican to advocate because it's a tax. Tariff is just the name of a particular tax. So the party against taxes is promising to levy taxes like you've never seen before. I'm quoting Mr. Trump. That's cuckoo. What is he talking about? And he kept saying the Chinese will have to pay a pretty high tariff. No, you idiot. The people who pay the tariff are the importers. If a Chinese car comes here, for example, an electric car, which the Chinese, by the way, now produce the highest quality and the lowest price. It costs $30,000. Mr. Biden already has 100% tariff on those cars, which means the $30,000 car would require an American buyer to pay $30,000. That goes to China for the car, and another $30,000, 100%, goes to Uncle Sam. An American pays an American government a tariff. It doesn't smite the Chinese unless you don't know what the words mean. Mr. Trump doesn't know, and his audience doesn't know. Economic literacy in this country is a disaster and has been for a long time. That's a consequence of a poor education system. So Mr. Trump's great economic plan is nonsense. And I don't want to take your time, but I won't tell you about all the other nonsense. If you were to deport millions of immigrants that are now in the country, those immigrants all have jobs because most immigrants are relatively young people looking for and needing a job. And if they have a job, they're contributing into Social Security. You pull them out of the economy, you plunge Social Security into an enormous dilemma because all that money will stop coming in. Does Mr. Trump recognize it? Not a clue. Never talks about it. You know, it's all Madison Avenue hoop-de-doodle. It makes as much sense to listen to Mr. Trump as to select which bar of soap you're going to buy because you have the belief, which the advertiser gave you, that using this brand of soap will really do a wonderful thing for your sex life. You giggle when I say it. You laugh when it's on the television. But that's what you're doing. Giggle and laugh at Mr. Trump. But what did Kamala Harris give us in response? An equally big picture? Not at all. She's going to improve the child tax credit. She's going to give first-time home buyers $25,000 to put down on their $400,000 house that they're trying to buy. Yeah, these are little things. They don't mean much to most people who are not in these situations. Americans are not having children the way they once did. So the child tax credit affects actually fewer people, and it's not very much money, and it's not going to change anything. Change anything. That's what the mass of people wanted. There are 100 ways, polls and others that show that. And Mr. Trump said, I'm going to check. I'm doing things that conventional politicians don't dare do. I am saying bad words about other countries. Look at me, I'm naughty. I behave naughty. I talk all kinds of ways that a good politician of the conventional Republican and Democratic sort don't. And of Ms. Harris, she doesn't talk the way I do either. She's much more polished. But that's a disadvantage. If you don't have a dramatic program and you look and sound like what you were, and if your advisors are telling you don't say anything bad about Mr. Biden, well, then you look like more Biden. And more Biden nobody wants. Nobody. Nobody. And I don't mean that when he became, too old. I mean, even before that. He's been a conventional down the middle politician his entire political life. One expects nothing from him and he delivers. And she had to break from that and she didn't do it. And she didn't come up. Think for a minute if Bernie Sanders had come in and said, I'm taxing all the billionaires. That's the kind of idea. That would have been very popular. Everybody would have understood, and he could have made fun of Elon Musk, which would please an awful lot of other people also. And had he done so, Mr. Musk would not have dared buying votes in Pennsylvania, which he did. Okay, it's remarkable what happened here. Last thing I have to say, people have been asking me since the results have been known, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? Well, I think what I'm trying to tell you is no one knows, because this nonsense that they spoke is absurd. It's absurd. You're not going to stop immigration. No president has. If you try, it's going to have all kinds of effects in this country. Immigrants do work that Americans either won't do or will demand much more salary to do. And that's going to stoke your inflation, which everybody doesn't want. Has this been thought through? Of course not, because it's just advertising nonsense. So to tell you what he's going to do, I can't do it. And is he going to hit the country, the world with tariffs, as he said he would do? No, that's nonsense too. And let me give you, in closing, just two examples of why that's nonsense. If everything that comes into the United States, which is what he said, everything, I'll put a tariff on everything. Whoa, really? That means that whatever the price is that's coming in, it's going to be more than it used to be, because the importer who brings it in has to pay for it plus the tariff to Uncle Sam. Well, now, let's see. The first thing that would happen if he did that is he'd put a tariff on one of the things that comes in the morning. Coffee. In the coffee goes the sugar. Happens bringing too. Oh my goodness, your latte will cost you $30. And you don't have $30 for a latte in the morning, do you? And he knows if he wants to be aided within weeks of taking office, pulling a stunt like that is the way to go. You can't do it. That's why all those presidents who promised to bring manufacturing back to America, they all promised it, Republicans and Democrats alike. None of them delivered it. None of them. Not Trump in his first 4 years, not Mr. Biden. It's all public relations. Blah, blah, blah. It's nothing there. If you make it difficult for the companies in China to export, you know what they've been doing? They've been moving to Vietnam, who's got a great industrialization, picking up the people who go to Vietnam. And if you then put a tariff on Vietnam, they'll go somewhere else, to Malaysia or Indonesia or who knows where the next one. Everybody knows how to play this game. So this is all fakery. It's fake economics. It's a fake program. We have no idea what he's going to do. He'll either do the silly things he says because he doesn't know better, or he'll pick experts who will tell him it's reasonable, and then he'll hit a stone wall, or he'll come up with an entirely new program you have no idea about, none of us know, which is, of course, running an election on fake promises. But that's what you got. You've got this. So here's the conclusion. Americans wanted change. They didn't want what exists to keep on going. In my own opinion, as you know from my work, we are on the down of the American empire. This is a capitalism in a lot of trouble. The dollar isn't what it was around the world, and the United States has a competitor in China and the BRICS like we've never had in a century. Those are the real issues shaping us, and they're hurting. And the people at the top are pushing, offloading the pain of a declining empire onto the middle and lower classes, who are angry and bitter that that's happening. But of course, no one is allowed to say what I just said. So they get angry at poor immigrants or Chinese. It's pathetic. It's childish. It solves nothing. It's hysterical. That's the reality of what we got. And so I wish I could tell you where this is going, but the candidate who won has made that impossible because this is a pure advertising hustle to get unsatisfied working class people to vote in a particular way. And once the vote is over, that working class, which was forgotten by Mr. Biden, will be forgotten by Mr. Trump, just as he forgot them in his first race. The only major achievement of the first 4 years of Mr. Trump occurred in December of 2017, when he gave one of the biggest tax cuts in American history to corporations and the rich, just as they had come off of a 30-year period in which this country redistributed wealth from the bottom and the middle to those at the top. It was a moment when they needed a tax cut least, and that's when that genius gave them the biggest one ever. Of course, they're expecting the same from him, and if I had to bet, that's probably what they'll get. And the rest will be advertising noise, smoke, and mirrors. All right, enough from me. I'd like to turn now to Harriet and ask her if she would talk a little bit about what this election means for the position of women and for the intimate life of our people.
Well, the intimate life of our people has gone through a revolutionary change. It's the only revolution that's been around, but it's a revolution in which women who worked with the tools that men gave them, the apartments they paid for, the vacuum cleaner, and so on, worked to produce food, cleanliness, children, sex, social connection, and emotional support for men, were forced out to work by US companies wanting to make more profit. US companies, once they had the option because of computers and jet planes and faxes and so on, they could move their operations to China, exploit those people, pay them, between $1 and $3 an hour instead of 35, and deny union and white male jobs that supported families. And the American dream had been that. The American dream was, although they didn't specify for whom it was designed, but for if you were white and you were male, and don't forget, until the 70s, the United States was a 90% white country. So there are a lot of people. If you were white and male, you could get a decent job and support a dependent wife and 2 children. Okay? That really was the promise. And you could get respect. You could get respect because you'd been at the job for 20 years. Everybody knew you were a good machinist. You had connections in your neighborhood. Until 1970, you had neighborhood activities. There's a little information that shows you what's happened. The United States now has fewer people involved in anything, a political group or blood drive or PTA or anything, than were in bowling leagues alone. in the 1970s, because part of your union and your job, you had a bowling league, okay? And you had a credit union, and you had meetings with one another. No more. At any rate, so what happened? Well, what happened is women had to go out and work outside the home, and men who were feeling unmanned by their lowered salaries, since they didn't have the family wage they used to get, wanted their wives to work harder for them, produce more sex, produce more cleanliness, take care of the children more, entertain his friends, socially connect him, meet his emotional needs for being unmanned by the economy. Okay? Well, women, having come back from a day of work, were a lot less willing to do a second shift, as Arlie Hochschild's book, Second Shift, describes. And so women started refusing and opting out, to the point that the majority of women in the US, for the first time in history, are now single. And women refuse marriage. The idea of women dragging men, excuse me, to the altar because they're reluctant, no more. Blue-collar men complain that women won't marry them. It's a bad deal. They want the second shift and the first shift outside the household, and that doesn't work for women. So they're opting out. As I mentioned before, 70% of the divorces are initiated by women, and men are bereft. There's a popular song in country music, "You've been thinking and I've been drinking." You know, women think about leaving, men get drunk. Okay, they don't know how to make emotional friendships and support each other. And they're very alone, and they're frightened. And buying guns to feel more manly and defending themselves and their family doesn't really work out for them. They're scared. And also being more manly, because it's very interesting that Trump supporters are the same people who buy penis extenders and testosterone creams and have guns. There have been, the Wall Street Journal and Mother Jones had graphs showing this. So these guys are feeling unmanned. I don't have a woman to dominate. Oh my God. I don't have a job which gives me status. Oh no. And Trump says, I'll make you safe. I'll bring America back again. I'll make it great again, even though it's failing. And it's not doing as greatly as it did before you took away the manufacturing jobs and made China the manufacturing center of the world. You're not going to get that. However, the promise, I will make you great again. And I will force women to be dependent on you. I'll take away their rights to their own reproductive apparatus so that, you'll be in charge. And therefore, Kamala, because at least she spoke out on abortion very clearly, she did have many more women vote. However, she still lost. But, these are promises, as Rick mentioned, the economic promises. These are the emotional promises that won't be fulfilled. And already, men are all the mass murderers in the United States. There was only one woman in the last 5 years who was becoming a man in transgender surgery. So she was an aspiring man. Only one of the mass shooters. They're going crazy. If you walk around a population center like New York City, where I live, you really can't go more than 4 blocks without encountering some man who looks very frightening and is gesticulating and being crazy. And people are being shot randomly all the time. There's a mass murder every day in the United States now. At least 2. I mean, at least 1, if not 2, where people are very angry and they count on, I will reclaim my power through a gun, because that's what the gun owners told me. And so they randomly shoot people for a sense of power, just like they do in the movies. Conan the Barbarian shoots people and is mighty, okay? And it's sad. And so that men are in terrible trouble, women less. Women are in less trouble, but they're in economic trouble because the economy is failing and because they don't make as much as men, and because if they're single mothers, which a third of American parents are single mothers, then they live in poverty and they have to work full time and they can't afford childcare. The average childcare payment for one child varies in the United States between $5,300 and some dollars and $17,000 a year. And if you have two, that's double. And so,
Harriet,
yes,
Harriet, let me interrupt you. We'll come back. I want you to come in with comments about what I say, what Shahram says, and then we go back and forth
good.
to have some discussion about these issues that you brought up. Shahram, could you tell us how all of this sits in your mind?
Yes. Firstly, thank you, Harriet, for those amazing. I mean, I was just really zoomed into. I mean, I just really, enjoyed your take on the issue, as I did with Rick. But obviously, I know more about Rick's way of thinking about the world than I do about yours. My experience or my vantage point is that of an immigrant who lives in central Pennsylvania. And I wanted to say a couple of things that I've observed living as I said, as an immigrant in central Pennsylvania, where Trump got 80% of the vote. And it's going to sound somewhat surprising to a lot of people. And I really think that the reason why my neighbors voted the way they did has nothing to do with racism. It's going to be surprising coming from an immigrant with the kind of melanin that I have in my skin, which is a critique of my liberal friends who have this particular image of the Trump voter, which we also saw supporters of Hillary Clinton 8 years ago, calling them a basket of deplorables, as well as Mr. Biden, who akined them to garbage. So clearly, there is this elitist bias which is at play in this story, and I feel, correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, but my feeling was and is that I'm not surprised by this result because I live in a swing state, as I said, and I could see the angst and anxiety that people from all identities, because we live in this world where we have to classify people into neat categories and identities. Honestly speaking, my Latino neighbors, my Black neighbors, my white neighbors, everyone lives through this inflationary period in which they experienced, a decline in what they could buy. So they could literally see that the groceries had gotten more expensive. They could literally observe that. So as far as I'm looking at it, and particularly I got really, obviously as an immigrant, I feel anxious about what has happened. No, don't get me wrong. But I felt that on Twitter and social media, for example, my liberal friends were criticizing Muslims, for example, Arabs, for, either not voting or voting the way they did. Similarly, blaming Latinx people, I hope you get deported, that kind of stuff, which in my mind, at least, is the reason why we're here in the first place, right? This formal, inauthentic, curated kind of politics does not appeal to me, someone who grew up in a lower middle class family. It does not. There's a particular culture that smacks of inauthenticity. And I really feel that inauthenticity of the Democratic Party and the pro-globalization folks has really, really harmed the cause of the left. I also just wanted to kind of say one more thing I found it really fascinating when Rick talked about the tariff, because there's some good news, obviously. Tesla is 13.3% up, which is great news for Elon Musk. I just learned a really good lesson in investing, because you invest in buying policy, you dance on the stage for a particular candidate, and 1 month later, the valuation rises and you're good to go. So it closed at 250 last night and it opened at 285. I'm extremely happy about that because you see, capitalism is working really well for Mr. Elon Musk. He's in power now, which means that he now has the power. Because remember, back in the day when we were learning undergraduate economics, we learned that competition is a really good thing. You remember that?
Yes.
That myth, that was a lovely myth, because Elon Musk is in power now because he wants that tariff to protect his Tesla's falling operating margins, because he could not compete with Chinese competition. So he needs to dance on the stage of a political candidate so that he can find that little policy that's gonna, turn his money into more money. And it did. I'm very, very pleased that I learned this really important lesson about investing.
All right, let me pose the question that comes to my mind listening to both of you, and then I'd like to hear both of you sort of address it. I come away from what we've discussed over this last half hour that we've been talking to each other with a notion, sad as it may be, that nothing much is going to change, that the people in charge are making the system work for them the way you talked about Elon Musk. He made the system work for him. And Harriet pointed out developments that have been pursued and perpetuated for decades now by Republicans and Democrats. They barely talk about them. We're taken aback by the very statistics Harriet reminds us of because we don't hear about them very much. That somehow, even though it's the intimate life of people every day, and therefore ought to be a primary concern for a politician, is in fact swept under the rug, like the empire that is falling apart around us. So is it then a reasonable conclusion that we're going to have 4 years of mostly nothing, in which we have this clown who will be dancing up there either by himself or with Elon Musk or somebody else like that, doing things that are enriching for these folks who are already rich, and leaving all the rest of us with our job problems, with our intimacy problems, with our American dream we can't afford. And so 4 years from now, we will watch Mr. Trump thrown out of office, or Mr. Vance, as people react because the Democrat, whoever it is, will be saying, well, nothing changed. If you really want change, which we'll all want more then than we even do now, and we'll be angry at Mr. Trump because he didn't do it the way he cashed in on Biden and Harris because they were in power and they didn't make a difference. Is that a reasonable expectation? I just would be interested if each of you could say yes or no or whatever you think about it.
I think it's not reasonable because as I look as a woman and as someone who's been involved in women's issues and personal life issues all my life, women's lot has changed. Sexual mores have changed. There's a lot more people having sex. There will be a lot more women killed because they'll bleed to death when they try to miscarry or when they're in the process of a legitimate miscarriage and hospitals refuse to treat them and insurance companies don't have to pay for that and doctors are afraid they'll lose their licenses and hospitals will be afraid that they're fined. And so even though New York State does have a state abortion permission that passed, whether that'll pass this right-wing Supreme Court, I have no idea. But I think a lot more women will die and a lot more women will be activated. And that is a change because women were the most active anti-Trump in the first place. And so I think that's a change. I also think another change will be that Americans may actually get over the anti-communist purges and scourges of the union movement and of this country that happened in the 1950s and realize they had better have a socialist alternative they had better look for a different system, not only a different change of persons, and that they should get money out of elections. I looked it up because I was curious. They've already spent 16.6, I think it is, but it's $16 billion on this election. And who pays the piper calls the tune. And so I think people who were expecting a different tune will be angry. They may just slide into despair. But if somebody appears like Bernie Sanders, who's actually popular and who the Democrats stabbed in the back, but who might be so popular that he doesn't disappear, that will be a change. That this is a moment where change is possible, and this is a moment when women's lives are going to slide down. Already 1 in 4 women in the United States has had an abortion. And I think, of course, rich people have always had abortions. They can fly to Puerto Rico and get some doctor, or they can have some doctor in New York City or somewhere else perform the abortion, and so they're fine. Or if they're in a state that doesn't supply abortions, if any last that do, they can travel to that state and afford the abortion. But for the mass of women, this is a disaster. And if they thought that getting married was some kind of a haven, getting married and having children, they know that isn't true. That's why 47% of women of childbearing age in the United States have decided they don't want children. Women are getting tubal ligations and other things all over the place because they can't afford it. Even if you have a stable marriage and you're not one of the 70% of people who get divorced or separated without the legal system, 2 people can't afford it. They just can't afford a child. And so this will be a huge problem in the United States, and it will change that way.
Shahram, what's your thinking about whether things will change or not, and how that plays out?
Not that I disagree with Harriet, but honestly, I feel that as a father of 10-year-old, my son woke up today. He was extremely depressed. He asked me what happened. I told him. But then when I told him that, we're Marxists, we were kind of prepared for this. So I told him that, your generation has to build that alternative. And because I teach Gen Z kids, and a lot of them, or most of them rather, are extremely concerned about the fact that the economy, the politics is moving in a direction which is not working for them. Black, white, Chinese, regardless of the demographic background, you talk to these kids and they're sick of the way capitalism is working, or rather not working for them, right? And the only thing I feel that we need to think about in terms of 2028 in particular, and I really want your opinion about this and the possibility of this, is that now that this inauthentic liberal left has been decimated, at least from the electoral map, that's what it looks like. And we know that the right has never really lived up to its false promises. Are we in a position to say that if we revive the power of our communities, because remember that in the 1960s, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and all of these amazing heroes of the civil rights movement or the movement for social justice were as much a product of the communities as much as they were great individuals and human beings with all those individual skills that we celebrate. They were also embedded in communities. So one of the things that neoliberalism has done is to sever our communities from the spirit of organization, connectivity, solidarity, and all the rest of it. So I really feel, and it's not just about the US, by the way, I'd like to add that this is true everywhere. Even a country like Bangladesh, for example, where, capitalism was seemingly doing well in the peripheral context, has led to that particular situation. Capitalism is not doing well anywhere for the working class, not in the core, not in the periphery, nowhere. Nowhere has this system worked for anyone ever. It's not working for women. It's not working for children. It's not working for immigrants. So for me, I feel that it's time that we reorganize communities within this country and around the world.
Okay, let me respond a little bit myself. My hope is that out of what just happened, that the Republican Party will itself split between those who have become 100% Trumper and those who really want to be Republicans but can't stand Mr. Trump. And I'm equally hopeful that the Democratic Party will also split between that part of it that is responsive to the big business donors who very cleverly years ago discovered that they should give money to both parties because then they control everything. Then they can go through these charades every few years in which we get rid of one to have the other, and then 4 years later get rid of the other to go back to number one. And it does it in an endless cycle, punctuated by whatever personal differences this or that candidate has. I would hope that the Democratic Party splits and that the Bernie Sanders wing, for lack of a better term, has the courage to become a real alternative. I would argue that there is plenty of evidence, including in many parts of the country that voted for Trump, that had they had a clear leftist program put forward by a clearly leftist person, that they would have been very interested in and very willing to consider voting for that person rather than Trump and rather than Harris or equivalents of those people. Most European countries, I say this for the audience that may not know, most European countries, the places to which Americans like to go when they go to Europe, France, Britain, Germany, Italy, they have many political parties. They don't celebrate themselves as countries that believe in freedom of choice, but in fact, they give their voting populations choice. 3, 4, 5, 6 parties, not at all unusual. We are the only country. Even Canada has more than 2. We are the only country which seems to need to say we believe in freedom of choice, but then make an exception for politics, as if there the choice is what, less necessary? You must be kidding. If you believe in freedom of choice, it isn't enough that you have 27 brands of toothpaste to choose among in the drugstore. It might be nice to have some choice, to make it necessary, for example, if no one party wins, that they have to make coalitions. They have to give some power to the people who got 30% of the vote. It's not a winner take all. We've allowed these two parties to operate a duopoly, a situation where they can and do systematically exclude. Even in this election, in a number of states where either Jill Stein or Cornel West or other socialist candidates were on the ballot, there were signs in the voting places saying, if you vote for anyone other than Trump or Harris, your vote will not be counted. That was allowed in many parts of the United States. In other parts, they solved it by not having them on the ballot. So you literally could not vote for who you would prefer among people who had been spending the last year campaigning for that job. It's extraordinary what we permit here. Really extraordinary. And so here's my hope, that out of this defeat comes an awareness that we really need another political party to be the place where we all come together where we build the community that Sharam talked about, where we can say to women, here's a political party that will put forward a program of what you actually need. And yeah, we'll have disagreements amongst us. Republicans disagree, Democrats disagree. We can disagree too, but it will be disagreement around a common program that will give Americans a real choice. The polls indicate that a majority of the voters said they were not enthusiastic about either of the two candidates, but they had nowhere to go. It might be a really important thing for those of us who think and talk the way all three of us do, if we could be part of a third party that would give people that alternative, because we would do it fairly and honestly and clearly with people unafraid to break the mold, because they are breaking out of this two-party duopoly. Could I have your, because we're running out of time, what do both of you think about that particular idea? Pro, con, what thoughts do you have? Harriet, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because having studied this, the FBI and CIA in the 1970s had an operation called the Great Wurlitzer, where they had put tens or hundreds of thousands into the women's movement with its CIA operator, Gloria Steinem, and in the Black movement as well, to change women's liberation, which at first included, we thought by standing up, we would bring everybody with us because we were at the bottom. No. So it became the women's movement against males, basically, and for inclusion in the capitalist system, and they excised the working class and the class component of the movement. With the Black movement, they changed the civil rights movement to the Black Power movement, kill Whitey, okay? So they very successfully created identity politics, which prevented us from what we need, and we have to say, we need each other. We're not going to win in a splintered party. We're not going to win as feminists versus Black Lives Matter versus climate activists versus LGBTQIA. No way. We have to unite like an umbrella where the center is socialism and all the panels are things like feminism, gay rights, homosexual rights, economic rights, union rights, climate rights. And that, because that's what we have. We have to say what we have is people, and we keep everything going because we're people that do the labor. What they have is the money. And we need each other to stand up and to organize that and make that happen, and have the left have some idea of that. So they're not worrying about microaggressions at a meeting. They're worried about how do we unify and making sure we're seen. And the union movement has a lot of wonderful aspects of that in Sean Fain and the UAW. And so does the feminist movement, has some of that, and so does every other. Because we obviously need each other. We just lost.
Sharam, what do you think?
Absolutely, Rick. Absolutely. 100%. It's an excellent idea. It's not only an excellent idea, it's the need of the hour. It's imperative that we start thinking about this idea right now so that we stand a chance in 2028. Number one, we have to do this right now, immediately. Don't wait for it for another 3 more years so that our liberal friends can then tell us to hold the nose and vote for that kind. I don't want that. We should start right now. Unite the many to fight the few. And I think the basis of that has always been respect and solidarity. Respect and solidarity. Stop dividing people, as Harriet said. Stop these oppression contests. I'm more oppressed than you are. Stop believing that there are any individual solutions to systemic problems like recycling is going to solve the ecological crisis, or eating at Whole Foods is going to, do organic is going to change anything fundamental. Stop that. That's not going to work. We need to sit together, as Harriet said, and as you also kind of pointed out, on a broad program of social justice that unites the many to fight the few. And I think it's not only possible, it's imperative.
Well,
You know,
social justice and class justice, I think that has to be right
Yes.
up there too.
Absolutely.
Yep. And such a party would not be afraid to talk about class and class differences and class struggles. That would be a central part, not more important than the others, but a central part alongside the other issues, so that the comprehensiveness of what we're about will, I think, appeal to people, even if they disagree with this or that particular point that gets made. I would like to make a comment also that the Trump forces include people who started years ago to work. They decided that their strategy was to capture the Republican Party, and so that's what they've done. And when they were defeated 4 years ago, they went right harder to work. And across the 4 Biden years, Mr. Trump kept going, organizing his white supremacists and his gun enthusiasts and his anti-abortion people and all the others that he had to placate and to bribe and to promise whatever it is they wanted. And I think there's a lesson there. If you want these things to happen, then you've got to, as Shahram says, you've got to settle down, whatever your situation, and go to work with a clear strategic priority on building that party. If we have problems amongst ourselves, we'll try to resolve them in a way that builds that party. And we have that kind of solidarity, especially because people are, as you put it poetically, Harriet, lonely, isolated, without community. Shahram spoke to that too. Let's be a community for like-minded people who see the need for what we're talking about. My guess is they're everywhere, and in that way, the Republicans, because of what they support, are not part of this. And the Democrats, because of what they've become, they're not part of this either. We're talking to the other X%. And X% is many more people than you need to have an effective political party.
Well, I would like to add, though, something that we would have to be psychologically astute, that we would have to be inclusive. One of the things that Sebastian Junger talks about in his book, Tribes, is about what happens to men who leave the Army or the Navy or the Marines. You know, our son-in-law was in the Marines. Every single person in his squadron now has committed suicide, except for the 4 that were killed in battle and him. Everyone else committed suicide. Many more people starting in Vietnam, going on to Iraq, Afghanistan, kill themselves than are killed in battle. Because in battle, people understand each other, men cry on each other's body and comfort one another, and they know what they've been through. And psychologically, people are alienated, and we need to be inclusive on every level in our meetings, not pandering to people's weirdo needs, but emphasizing kindness and solidarity above all.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, you know, when I was growing up, or this is probably true for everyone, our parents used to tell us that politics is about service. It's about trying to help people. It's about trying to help those who need it, to rise up for people, to stand up for the rights of the oppressed. You know, that was the idea in our minds, at the very least. I probably was raised by a different kind of parents.
Yes.
But the moral of the story is that what happened to all of that? What happened to the idea that politics is about, you know, this was even a part of the great religions, right? That politics is about service and sacrifice. And it wasn't about you. It was about the people that you were representing. And, you know, patriotism was about, you know, the greatest patriot was the person who stood up for the rights of the oppressed rather than who snatches the most from the population.
Well, the way it's articulated in the United States, and this may be a good way to close this, we had that kind of politics at various times and places. But instead of keeping it, we decided to run our politics in a, quote, business-like manner. And that was much truer than anyone understood. It became a business. And if you talk to many of the young people who go into politics now, they're making a choice between being a doctor or a lawyer or a real estate agent, and they decide to go into politics. And they want and expect that they can make a killing there, that they will become rich. And that if you look at Mr. Clinton or you look at Mr. Obama, they sure did. They did very well for themselves. Mr. Trump said in his first race that he was in it so that he would be sure to come out of being the president richer than he went in. It's a completely different mentality. And I think Harriet's right. A new party would be much more successful if it made explicit reference to that we want to be a place that doesn't work like that, where the governing idea is to offer the American people an alternative path forward, which is what politics should be about, and not about glitzy Madison Avenue advertising, which we all know is phony because its goal isn't to help you. Its goal is to sell more product of who's ever paying for the advertising. This is the horror of what happens when capitalism as an economic system colonizes the rest of society, subordinates politics and family and religion and everything else in society to its own hierarchical, profit-driven mentality. All right, my biggest hope in having this special Wolff Responds has been realized. By having the two of you on, I think it became richer. And what I wanted it to do, I think it has done. But I invite my audience, let us know. My point was to say, don't struggle through the difficulty we're all having with the outcome of this election all by yourself. Don't get depressed. Are there things that should get you upset? No, of course. Do you have the right to feel sad about it? Of course. But you are surrounded by people. We're three of us right here, and we're far from the only ones that are already struggling on how to make something good happen out of this defeat. If we stay with that, we will be able to do it. As always, folks, before I close, let me remind you, if interventions like this strike you as reasonable, please share this program that you've just watched with your friends. Let them know how they can go on the YouTube and watch it for themselves. That's why we do this, to share it, to talk with all of you, to make and build the community that we've been talking about. And of course, since you all know it does cost money to do this, if any of you are in a position to give us a contribution, that will be appreciated as all. Thank you, Harriet Fraud. Thank you, Shahram Azer. And to all of you, talk to you again soon.
Okay, bye-bye.